Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is SamElliott64, and welcome back to the RoboCast. I'm joined alongside
Steve the American Killjoy.
Woodrow.
And the three of us are joined by a guest from the beta bounty episode of BattleBots Bounty Hunters. Introduce yourself.
Hey there, I'm Nik from the Bloodsport team. For reference on camera, so I'm Justin is our team captain. I'm the guy with the glasses who missed the button.
I was going to bring that up.
So that's me. I do a lot of the background engineering. We work together on all of that stuff. I'm more focused on the weapon.
Well, I was about to bring up the weapon because I think a lot of people I've seen online this year, we three kind of discussed it a little bit with regards to Witch Doctor this season in particular, is the choice for a lot of teams recently to go with a tool steel, specifically S7, rather than your more traditional AR weaponry that, for example, Rotator has switched to this year and other teams have used throughout BattleBots' history. Why was that?
So S7 has kind of been one of those mainstays from like older teams. Tombstone very famously uses S7 a lot. Minotaur, I believe, as well, for their drum. And in the RoboCast manual, they have all kinds of test data about S7. So we were looking hard at that, and basically our school of thought, which may or may not have been justified before this season, was to think that AR 500 will tend to bend, and it's got a lower yield strength than S7, so it'll bend before S7 breaks. So the question really is whether you want a bar that bends or a bar that breaks, but maybe it won't in the same circumstances. I think after this season, we would have preferred bent weapons.
You lost two weapon bars, didn't you, this season? Was it the tri-bar that broke against Gruff, and then obviously in this episode we'll get to a little bit later on, your big bar as well got chewed up a little bit.
Yep, the thick bar.
The thick boy. Let's talk about Bloodsport up to this point. Obviously, a marked improvement from last season. Obviously, it wasn't that Bloodsport did badly last year. I think you got, was it 2 wins or 3 wins? I can't remember off the top of my head.
It was 3 in the fight night rounds, and then we also had a grudge match against Sharko after that.
That's right, and
so we came away 4-2, everything all considered.
So not a bad run by any stretch of the imagination, and then to take that another level this season, where obviously you beat, I think you're the only team that beat Endgame, which is quite interesting, right? Because you beat the winner. So,
well, and that was fun too, because we go way back with the Endgame guys. We all used to do Vex in high school, and actually our team captain Justin went up against Jack in the World Finals, like in 2013 or whatever in Vex. So this has been like a long time coming in terms of a match. We talk a lot with them about design stuff, and they were one of our big inspirations getting into the show.
Okay. I think they were a season before you guys, weren't they, in 2018?
Right.
Yeah,
that's a lot of good information too, because we also forget that a lot of these builders had a lot of growing time in First Robotics or Vex Robotics or whatever they got into in high school or college, and to meet people along the way, fight them along the way, and they kind of grow together. So it's kind of cool to see that that you guys kind of meet up again.
Yeah, it's a nice reunion, I guess.
In a way, it's a more destructive reunion. There's a more constructive robotic company. Yeah, a little bit more expensive. That's true.
Dear. But obviously, your season ended somewhat prematurely, maybe against Tantrum. Obviously, Tantrum went on to have a phenomenal season themselves, so that there's no disgrace going out to that was your only loss in the main competition, which is quite remarkable when you think about it. Was there any? Obviously, you ended up doing the Bounty Hunter stuff, but was there any regret that maybe you could have done anything more in the main competition? Obviously, you did so well. You beat Endgame, who obviously went on to win. You beat, Gruff, which is obviously notoriously difficult to beat. We've seen it, take Tombstone to 3 minutes. You beat Scorpius, who had the season of its life. I mean, what more could you have done, really?
Yeah, so in the background, we were working on a lot of really small technical issues. The two that were kind of plaguing us were after the Scorpios match, as we would assemble our different weapon hub assemblies, we were having some mechanical issues. It turned out the hubs, the way they interlock with the bar was not quite concentric after taking it apart and putting it back together a few times, which was causing like a wobble. And the only weapon that didn't do that was the tri-bar.
Right.
And that
was broken.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that
that's why we used it against
last.
Gruff. Instead of the tougher AR-500 disc that we used against Scorpios. And then, we lost that, so we had to kind of make do. There was that, and then there was a weapon speed controller problem where, so in 2019, in season 4, we had these speed controllers that they would get up to a high temperature during the fight, and then there would be a thermal cutoff, so they would actually shut off before they burst into flames, and the weapon would kind of become sluggish as maybe 2 or 3 of these 4 weapon motors stopped working. And so we'd kind of go easy on it, where this year we doubled the size of the speed controllers, and we did all our thermal math, and we figured out, okay, these shouldn't overheat, but we were still having the issue where it would go sluggish. So we were thinking maybe, in hindsight, it might have been a settings issue with the speed controller.
Sure.
And we've been kind of kicking ourselves for not experimenting more with that during the season to see if we could figure out what it was.
Well, who knew that we were even going to have a season? You know what I mean? There was that too. So I mean, you can only do so much R&D before there's hey, it's October, be ready.
There's only so much you can test a spinner outside of.
That's true. That's another. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because you can't just hit stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You need a safe, contained space, and unfortunately, there's not many of those around in the world. Unfortunately, apart from the TV shows arenas, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Something we've been doing since then. We set up a rig where the motors are all spinning a giant ratchet, and then the ratchet, will come closed and stop all the motors, so we can simulate a hit from the motor's perspective without actually endangering anyone.
Yeah, which we do. You guys may or may not have video proof of testing the weapon of the robot in an open parking lot, and it hit a TV, and it didn't. It was a little scary.
Yeah, so that one was an abandoned lot. I wasn't there because our team is spread out, across the country.
Right.
So I'm in Michigan. The team is based primarily in Boston. And then our weapon operator, Aaron, he actually is local to LA. So it was nice to have him around.
You're all over the place.
Yeah. So I wasn't there for that. So I only just saw the video as well.
Yeah.
But it's an abandoned lot, and everybody was hiding behind a big dumpster on the other side of a hill, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was dangerous for the camera, but
yes, that tripod did not look right after that.
Right.
At least the people were okay. That's the main thing.
Yeah, everyone was. It was a safe distance away.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We are here, of course, to discuss the beta bounty. So if you haven't watched it, now is the time to click off and go and watch it. And if you haven't, if you have watched it, then stick around because we've got a lot to talk about.
Beta's bounty.
It was.
Was it really though?
Bounty.
It was the LockJaw bounty.
We all know, speaking of LockJaw. They kick off the episode with Axe Backwards.
Dang it, Kurt. What are we doing with Axe Backwards, man?
I'm setting it on fire, mainly.
I
respected his, I've still got movement. He's got to come and hit me. I mean,
there was a lot of that in this episode. Yeah. I still have movement. We'll get to that too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but
it's very on fire.
I think... My one question was where was this LockJaw in the main competition? Because
I thought the same thing.
Seriously. I know at this point it's its fifth fight, which again we've discussed in Mount Hunters throughout that a lot of the robots now that maybe weren't as dialed in as they were at the start of the competition now are, and I do think that in this fight particularly, obviously we go to see it more later on, but LockJaw was just ruthless. It was just it was not taking any prisoners, and it really did a number on poor old Axe Backwards, which is just I do wonder if at this point, I know Kurt's invested a lot of time and money into axe backwards, but I do wonder if it's time to look at a different concept now, because as much as it's a really cool idea with this full body drum, it's it has the capability to put on great matches.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen it for 3 years now, and I kind of feel like maybe it's time to move on. I'm just sat here in my armchair discussing this.
I think this is the best version of axe backwards we have seen.
Undoubtedly,
and that's a shame because it caught fire multiple times.
Yeah, even in this fight. They obviously
you might have to ditch the flamethrowers, even though they're cool. It's just too much of a risk for that robot.
I think
too much going on.
Were what let it down here. Although at one point it did remove the fire from the robot, which was interesting. Yeah, it's a shame. They were obviously listening to their tunes as they were fighting as well. Jump around.
This one was particularly rough, I think, for them because they had, just brutal matches the entire season. We were next to them in the pits, and they were working around the clock for the entire filming to get back in the box. And you can kind of see in this fight, a lot of axe backwards that's there in this fight wasn't there in the previous fights. They had to make a bunch of stuff on site. They were in the machine, area a lot. So they were not quite back up to 100%, I think. But coming in, they were so close. I think that Shredderator match really showed something that they had.
Yeah.
That was a really good fight. And it is a shame because, it is such a unique design. And, obviously we've seen something many, many years ago in Robot Wars called Barbarous, which is, again, kind of similar, but it's not on the same planet, really. Like, they're leagues apart. Yeah. And I do...
It's hard to find a comparable robot, really.
No.
That's
the only one. That's the only one I can really think of off the top of my head.
And Red Drum, you know what I mean? That was mostly a drum.
Yeah. I do think there's definitely potential in the design. I just feel like... For BattleBots in 2020, 2021, I do think maybe... I don't know. It depends on what Kurt wants from it as well at the end of the day.
It's a tough question for the team.
Yeah, do they want to be competitive and win fights, or do they want to turn up, have fun, and get the occasional shock win, which has the capability to do? It's one of those, really, where do you want to be an entertainer or do you want to be a competitive team? And I feel like that's maybe something they need to think about going forward. But LockJaw, on the other hand, was just impeccable
on a different planet. Just completely eviscerated this robot.
Surgical.
That was awful.
With his hits. It was brutal.
Yeah.
Rightfully winning.
Absolutely. And they head through to round 2. Nick, we're going to come to you now. Fight number 2 is Bloodsport and Aegis, or I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it still. I'm a bit confused.
You'll have more information about what was going on with this fight. We know that Aegis got ass blasted in his last fight.
Yeah.
It wasn't much better in this one, to be honest.
No.
It limped into the arena and then didn't move much after that.
Yeah, talk us through it.
Yeah, this was another team where they had to work around the clock just to get back into the arena because they didn't have all that many spares, I think. So after Fusion, they had to stick some hub motors from, I think it was, what do you call those? Hoverboard things. Yeah.
Yeah.
They stuck a couple motors in there from that, and they wrapped the whole robot in like a tire. And then they came up to us before the match and they said, we don't want to have to pack our robot up and take it home. So,
wow. Okay.
Robot. Yes.
It was
just go full Gamma 9 and just have it dumped into a dumpster.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it seems like we were a bit brutal, that's why we were trying to save them the shipping.
I'm sure it was nice for you guys to let loose and just kind of see what Bloodsport could really do. As much as it's a competition and you want to win, there's always the element of don't write off your opponent because these things are expensive and it's about respect, right? You don't want to, hurt someone's, wallet and their feelings. It's a really difficult balance to get right. But
they wanted to, Sam. They wanted their feelings.
They wanted it. They wanted the beating.
Right. Well, and the other component is this was, I think, about 3 hours after the Tantrum match.
Right.
So that match got delayed a lot and was really late in the day. Mm-hmm. So we knew, if we won, we'd be fighting Sawblaze that night. If we lost, we'd be fighting, in the bounty bracket that night. And, good match, frustrating match for us technically. So having the Aegis match right after that was a nice way to release some of that anger.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. I'd say let's discuss the fight more, but there wasn't a fight really, was there? Poor Aegis.
This was just on-screen catharsis, if what I can say from your perspective, it's just to get all that out. It was brutal. We had 2 brutal fights in a row.
Well, we had 3 actually.
Oh well, yeah, that's true.
Oh, this is, yeah.
My one other note from this match is that their flipper. It was giving me flashbacks to my very first Beetleweight event, because we were right next to this like air cannon in this Beetleweight competition. It was like at a big Maker Expo, and this air cannon had like a faulty valve, I guess, that was making that horrible screeching noise every time it fired. And Aegis made exactly the same sound after the first couple of hits.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't sound happy, did it really?
Yeah, they described it as like a robot crying.
Or like a mating
on
call.
screen.
That's it. Strange people Chris and Kenny are.
Yeah, we locked them up and just unleashed them after you know. I mean, he does his baseball things, and now Kenny got a job. He picked up a position as a commentator on a Ultimate Fighting league of some kind. I forget what it's called, but it's good to see him get something more. He's gotten a lot of practice watching robots fight.
Each other. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see humans fight. That's whatever. But anyway, this fight, it was over pretty quickly.
I can't remember if I mentioned in the start of the year overview of all of the robots, but Aegis, when they were in CAD stage, had this lovely
the tiger image, which they put on.
In this fight, and I was so pleased to see it. It's just
I don't know if you guys have seen the original image that they wanted to put on Aegis, have you? The Joe Exotic full tiger print down the sides.
Something makes me think Discovery wouldn't have won.
Netflix would have been like, absolutely not, and just terminated the series right then and there.
The banana for scale survived, though.
It did survive, which is a testament to how indestructible those bananas are.
No.
Not like the inflatable ones you get over here.
This is true. Dang it.
Poor old Equinox, eh?
Oh, well.
Monkey.
Fight number 3.
It did not eat banana that day.
It did not eat banana. Fight number 3. Another brutal fight between Fusion and Rampage.
Yay, the Noxus
exists.
The Noxus got a fight on television. I'm so happy for them.
Oh, Rampage. You didn't deserve that.
I feel as though Fusion has 2 modes. Either absolutely completely eviscerate your opponent or fire.
Or both.
Or a mix of the two, yeah.
Yeah.
You get your good Fusion recipe. You get a little bit of both.
2 modes of Fusion. God almighty.
Yeah, this was
There wasn't
awful.
much left of Rampage afterwards, was there? I mean, the whole side was just pulled through itself and kind of ripped the wrong way. It was
not too dissimilar from how one of the members on that team did that to this robot and split it completely in half. That was that fight. He has a robot called Batter Blaster, which completely halved my first ant weight.
You can't feel too bad then.
No, yeah.
They had it coming.
I paid Fusion off.
I mean, to be fair, with Fusion, we know the YHI teams have an incredible track record of just producing destructive robots, and we've seen it in glimpses with Fusion. We haven't seen it consistently throughout, but the potential is certainly there. And I do wonder if they do stick with Fusion going into maybe
I imagine they will.
a new season. That could be a scary robot, because we saw a marked improvement in Hydra this series.
This is true.
The leap forward with Hydra, with Fusion as well, could be the same.
Let's be honest. Fusion is not a robot that you are happy about facing.
No.
It's got 2 very powerful kinetic weapons, and neither should be underestimated. We've seen lots of test footage. We've seen it all through this season that it has the potential. Even, for example, the Mad Catter fight in episode 1 of the main season, where it was, I think, winning that fight until it wasn't when it caught fire. If they can fix the thermal issues, let's call them, then they have a real shot of being the new SAO, which is, let's be honest, what it was designed to be.
It's almost like they need to turn the whole floor of the battle box into a heat sink, and then just dissipate heat through the floor so it doesn't explode, or just it's such a box of chaos, and it's so fun to watch. I'm so glad that they brought this robot, even if we had to see Waiachi get retired, even though we will see it one more time before the season's out. It was just a fun robot to watch. You knew you were going to get you knew you were getting a crazy fight when this thing entered the arena, bottom line. But yeah, it's our fun little fireworks box, and I'm very happy to see that it got a really good couple of fights this season, even if it caught fire a few times. I mean, what are you going to do? They really are playing with Pandora's box on wheels. So
I really have to thank them for helping me out with my bingo card.
Dang it.
Yeah, Nick, anything to add? I mean, obviously you've had issues with heat dissipation before, so I'm sure you can relate with the Waiachi team in this one and Fusion in general.
Yeah, that and trying to pack everything into such a small package.
Yeah. It's so small.
Man.
It's such a crazy machine, and it's like you said, it either works or it doesn't. And when it works, it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
We just barely missed them. Of course,
because they fought Tantrum, didn't they?
Yeah, and so we were like trying to decide whether we would rather have Tantrum or Fusion, and like Justin, who is kind of responsible for the chassis and everything, and getting everything made, he was like, "Oh, I'd rather fight Tantrum," and I was, from the weapon perspective, of like, "Oh, I'd rather fight Fusion to try to." Maybe we could try to outreach them and hit their chassis or something. But it's a scary robot. You never know really how it's going to go.
Yeah, obviously they can attack you from either side. You can't really prepare for a vert, and then suddenly you're fighting a horizontal. It's very interesting in that respect as well, tactically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they said at the start of this fight that they weren't going to use the vert unless they absolutely had to.
And they must have had to. They were in trouble, weren't they? I mean, they were on the back foot.
The need was clearly there that they needed to turn around vert.
All of these first fights of these brackets have just been one robot completely. Well, I mean, not all fights, but a good majority of them have been just one robot completely tearing one apart. That one, like this is my spot.
I think it must be the case of like, it's everyone's last fight if they lose, so you may as well go for it, right? So
save them the shipping.
About bounty hunters is the sort of all or nothing attack. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, fight number 4.
There we go.
Controversy, days since controversy. We can reset.
What is
that
crab
timer.
walking in BattleBots? What is it?
Well, if I remember correctly, so this was the episode that was posted literally the week that SlamMow fought Black Dragon as well. It was the same day. And that was not a good day for Craig, bless him, because he came in for a lot of abuse, which I know he's used to. He's had his fair share of people shouting at him on the internet, which he kind of brushes off. He's used to that kind of thing. He's a big boy. Mm-hmm. But I think this one definitely affected him a bit more because I don't think he was in the wrong here, and I feel like Hijinx. Did anything particularly wrong, or that the ref did anything particularly wrong. I feel like it was just a bit. It's one of those grey areas again where if Tombstone's not mobile against Scorpius, then why is Hijinx mobile against SlamMow? That kind of thing, Yeah,
this was a great fight. Let's really start with that. It was a really good fight. I did not expect Hijinx's wedge to get up underneath.
So many times as well.
It just had the right angle, and we got a suplex of that. I mean,
how do you suplex Hijinx? I mean, it's an impossible
so gangly.
Yeah, Craig just done.
Yeah,
and he also dumped it in the screws as well, which again, it's kind of the wrong shape to kind of get in there, but somehow managed to do it.
May have accredited to the
wheel failure.
The loss of one side drive for Hijinx, but yeah. The crab walking rule is an interesting one, but I think there is a point where you then look across at SlamMow and they're just not moving at all.
This is true, yeah.
I think that might well have swung it because I think they kind of started crab walking it around the same time. They were both kind of... They had movement, both of them were moving, and then suddenly SlamMow stops completely and then can't get off the kill slots. I think it was stuck
just
on.
From the pure physics of Hijinx spinning so fast that it was able just to.
I think the fact it was upside down as well may have helped it.
Yes.
If it was the right way up, it may have not been able to get out of its circumference as easily as it was doing. I think the fact that all that spinning was spinning at an angle, wasn't it? So that may have helped it as well.
That's the shame too. With Hijinx now being flipped over and that bar getting a higher cut up on SlamMow. didn't really work out well after the suplex. It really didn't help SlamMow.
I mean, you see the arms kind of flopping around afterwards when it gets hit. So
can I just applaud Craig Danby for going to the Dave Laurie School of Robot Combat and having some googly eyes attached for distraction tactics.
For how long they lasted.
Yes.
Excellent. Oh, mere seconds. I mean, Hijinx came in and just went, boink, gone.
Yeah.
But, you know,
it's good fun.
The most important part of the robot, as we all know.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, you were in the pits. What was your thought? I mean, this was toward the end of the event. I don't know if you'd like some teams probably either are still there or have left. Like you know what I mean? It's
right.
What was the feeling about this fight? I don't know if there's rumblings amongst teams.
Yeah, so we saw this one actually arena side, and kind of the whole season they'd been trying to be more aggressive with counting out robots that are crab walking, so that the fights are shorter and sweeter. They don't end up as just robots crab walking, but they were not perfectly consistent. A lot of people felt, and so I think this is a fight where it was a gray area, and to me it's a question of like who died first versus who died more.
Right.
And
should it have been a double KO?
I follow you, yeah.
Yeah.
Should it have been a double knockout?
Hijinx was crabbing before SlamMow died, but then SlamMow completely died. There was no movement. So it's a discretion call to the ref. And there were also a couple of different refs. So, depending on how that particular ref's discretion would go, there's just a little bit of variability. I don't know how you really fix that.
It is tricky because, no two fights are the same as well. That's another thing you have to consider. Like, there's no... Like, even when the same robots fight year after year, or even in the same event, but there are a couple of fights in upcoming episodes where teams rematch basically from earlier in the season, and I feel like you can't judge. You have to judge each fight as you see it. And I think in this case, the logic that was applied was that yes, they were kind of crab walking at around the same time, but then SlamMow stopped completely, and I think that is probably what swung it. I think it would have gone as a double KO had SlamMow kept crab walking around, because the commentary team even mentioned it. They said, "Are we heading for a double KO?" And then obviously SlamMow was completely dead. So it's a shame for Craig. Obviously, he started the fight much the aggressor and was on top of SlamMow for the most part, and then he wasn't. And Hijinx
damage limitation just started racking up a little bit, and unfortunately, SlamMow just petered out at the end.
What a season for Craig and SlamMow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, his only losses this season have been to Black Dragon, Hijinx, and Witch Doctor, who are all very, very solid machines. You can't really complain, can you? What can you say?
Yeah, we were really impressed with SlamMow, both just at how it performed, but also from a design perspective. Because, there's a lot of the suplex type, like grabbing lifter robots. And I feel like SlamMow's armor design, the way they integrated the lifter and the armor together is really smart. Just lift the wedge. Who'd have thought that's the way to go?
It's deceptively simple, isn't it? As well, like it's very unassuming, and yet it is very effective. And I do believe we are going to be, if BattleBots comes back for another season, we are going to be seeing SlamMow again.
Has already started designing it, so
doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me at all. On to round 2 then. Fight number 5 is LockJaw versus Fusion. Fusion coming across all Fusion, I guess, and bringing out the magic smoke. I will say,
had odd attachment.
I liked it. I liked the kind of the W wedge, I think, or a U wedge. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but it was
like mandibles on an insect.
Sure, it reminds me of I'm sure it's kind of the same concept as Scorpios' teeth across its front plow to kind of get under teams' vertical spinners and try and just hold them off the floor just enough so they can direct them around. It worked, and Fusion...
Big woof of smoke.
It was just hit the wall. It was just like...
It hit the wall and LockJaw, and then that... It was
LockJaw was hurting, though. There were a few... the wheels were suffering a little bit, and it was kind of hobbling around the floor as well, which wasn't, ideal for them, but I suppose,
You try sticking your leg in that weapon, it's not going to look good after the fact.
He really did get his weapon weapon to weapon on the vertical bit of Fusion, and I think he took the belt off. I'm not sure, but that weapon did go down, and LockJaw had just been right in there. So, once again, quite surgical, but
yeah. And I did like as well at the end of the fight when Fusion's clearly like struggling, and they tried to fire at the weapon, and then he just thought, nope, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
he just realised straight away that the robot wasn't having it. So a shame, but once again, a demonstration of power from Donald and LockJaw.
Where was this LockJaw? It's so frustrating. I mean, it really does what it does well. It goes to the rotator school of well, honestly, maybe rotator goes to the LockJaw school of lead with your defensive wedge, let them hit that, slow you up and down, and spin around, and then smack them. I mean,
it's kind of the Ray Billings maneuver, just with a more defensive setup.
Right, yeah, you start off, instead of actually like leading, Ray doesn't necessarily lead his rear end into things. He kind of just goats people into saying, hey, look at this chewy bit at the back, come get this, and then nope. So
Nick, you didn't actually end up fighting Fusion in the end. Obviously, you mentioned already you missed them just about twice. Would you have rather fought them than LockJaw, or would you have rather have fought LockJaw in the end?
I think, I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, we were super happy to fight a legend like Donald, and that was a super fun fight. With Fusion, I think there's maybe a higher chance that we could outlast them.
Sure.
But at the same time, the damage might be even more hefty with Fusion if they're working, so it's a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're both legendary teams at the end of the day, so you kind of got to consider it like that as well. But you obviously had a fight to go. Before that, you had to beat Hijinx,
right?
Which it was an interesting matchup because obviously they've got more reach than you do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Hijinx to hit. It is very spindly and gangly, but there's a lot of it that you can hit, and hit it you did.
Yeah, we were surprised by how durable their wheels were, because we took a couple shots on those and they just didn't. I mean, they're basically like Huge's wheels, I think she said, but we didn't know that at the time because we saw all just the little like painted bits on the outside of the wheel, and we were like, oh, we'll cut right through whatever that is.
There's a bit at the back of Hijinx where like you actually, there's a bit like towards the end where you've hit them a few times, and I think they're dead on the one side, but you actually cut past behind the wheel after you've hit it and cut through the chassis. You can kind of see the motor in the body itself. It's amazing that the wheel stayed on, to be honest.
Yeah, that was actually, I think, how we won the fight, was peeling back in there, and I think we killed something in the drivetrain system through there, one of the gearboxes maybe. Because we actually got a couple hits on that particular part. Like the first part, we peeled some of the armor open, and then the second hit, we found that same part of the robot again. And they're slippery because they'll be constantly turning and trying to aim that tail to deflect us, and then trying to use their reach advantage. And we were playing spin direction chess before the match because our weapon is bidirectional, so we can. Yeah, we spun both ways in the opening, like Twitch test.
Right.
And then I think actually between the Twitch test and the match, they changed direction. So we were both trying to psych each other out, try to figure out who was going to spin what way and plan the dynamic of the hit. So it was a driving battle more than I think it looked like, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, I think as well as that, we've obviously harped on the fact that your weapon has been very, very effective this year. I think your drivetrain as well has really got under the radar this year, because obviously we saw it against Gruff when, the weapon broke. We saw you push the Brown for basically the whole 3 minutes. And again, in this fight, I know Hijinx is pretty much the worst design going for trying to control a robot, because there's not much body to, control people with. But,
right.
you still bullied them around like it was nothing.
Yeah, we had to kind of play the wedge in this match. So that was fun. But yeah, the brushed drive we went with was really reliable for us, and we were really happy with how kind of the agility of our robot was able to serve us compared to a lot of horizontals, I think, focus primarily on the weapon.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's very fair to say.
Yeah, it was a good. exhibition of two horizontal weapons and how very different, even if they rotate the same way, it's very different. You have such larger moment of inertia for Hijinx's weapon, and it takes that much more torque to spin it up and keep it spun up. And you saw that a lot in these exchanges where you guys would most likely keep your weapon spinning with them. It would sometimes come to a stop, and they'd have to really get it all the way back up again.
Yeah.
And I think it was to their detriment in the end.
Right. And the other part of that is their reach advantage worked against them when we were able to lead with our wedge, because then we could stop their weapon up and then come in for a hit while our weapon was still spinning. Yeah,
they were getting really good plastic impact. Like there wasn't very much elastic. Like that weapon just stops. And then they really got to get that thing spun back up again. And it's tough to win without your weapon spinning, especially when it's the majority of your weight. It looks like almost. It seems like it seems like that thing is just so plainly heavy. When it's amazing how it gets spun up. And we saw in its fight against Uppercut how much energy can be stored. in there.
Oh, yeah.
I think our two weapons were similar weights, but ours is much more compact.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of the weight dedicated to those stabilizer fins, so the weight is closer to the center.
Yeah.
Whereas theirs is a
that
big
demonstration of bringing your weight in as opposed to bringing it out, where you have it'll spin faster as you bring the weapon weight in, but you have maybe a little bit less energy at the tip.
Right.
Physics, baby.
Yes, sir.
And that bar in particular was designed to keep the weight closer into the center so that it can have the strength where it needs it in bending load, because that was our anti-vertical weapon. And I was talking about the wobble issues. Once we gotten that bar dialed in, we just used that bar for every fight going forward through the bounty. So we used it against Aegis, which is kind of comical. And then in this fight against Hijinx, we were debating whether to do this or try out our long bar from the previous season, because we could also add the stabilizer fins to that.
I really wanted to see the Keyblade. I wanted to see the Keyblade.
The Keyblade. Everyone wants to see the Keyblade. It's fun.
What sort of match would you have to use the Keyblade?
So we almost used it for Tantrum, because it's got the lowest moment of inertia and the best spin up time, and then it's an inch thick S7, so it's stronger than some of the other blades. Not as strong as the thick bar, but it's still, I think, would be good enough for their drum. But the reason we didn't was because we were iterating through that spin up problem, and we didn't want to introduce another variable to that.
Sure.
And
so you went with what you knew, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean that's fair enough. I mean it's a shame because I think it just looks fantastic, but I get the reasoning why.
One of these days we have because that one's about 5 pounds lighter than all the others, and so we have an idea of possibly using it against someone like Hydra, where we could devote then the extra 5 pounds to just a really beefy self-rider pole that can survive the 15-foot drops. So we have ideas for how we can weave it into different strategies and configurations for next year. But we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, we will indeed. Obviously, you make it through to fight LockJaw. We've obviously said already, how good LockJaw has been throughout this entire competition so far, and it really continued in this fight because
bounty match here. Oh wait,
yeah, this could have been the bounty match, and I've been happy about it.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a good start from you guys. I think it's fair to say you got in there. You got the hits off as best you could, but Donald's triangular plow, man, I don't know what it's made out of, but like whatever it is, it works because it handled Son of Waiachi a couple of years ago. Like, well, it was, I don't know, it handled Son of Waiachi really easily a couple of years ago, and without trying to sound like an ass, it handled Bloodsport quite nicely as well.
Yeah, it's a really unorthodox wedge design, but it works really well. I think Duck tries something similar with those angled sides, but the way that LockJaw's plow is like curved, it seems to work better. It's a shallower kind of angle that you can just ride up. And it's hard because traditionally with a wedge, what you try to do is catch like the edge with the trailing, retreating side of your weapon rather than the advancing side that would go up onto the wedge. But this kind of gets rid of that weakness for the wedge. By just having you ride up the edge that you otherwise would catch. So if we ever have a rematch, we're going to have to try to figure out a way to maybe catch that edge or try to be a bit more patient with driving, maybe try to maneuver around a bit more.
Well, with the way this fight went, I imagine they'll set you up for a fight in the future. Maybe something that's got a little bit more weight to it.
Really good fight.
It was a really good fight.
Like probably one of the best of bounty hunters so far. It was like LockJaw. For want of a better word, they were just on fire. Like not for a change with LockJaw, not literally, because they chewed up your weapon bar something fierce. Obviously, you got flipped over. We got to finally see your self-righting pole do its thing, and that must have been quite relieving because obviously your weapon was stopped. And I think that must have
broken.
And broken.
Yeah. And broken. Yeah, we did hear that about a minute in, and I've watched the fight back a couple times now. You just hear this like
thud.
Bang.
You hear that, and then all of a sudden, there's a piece missing from the blade.
That like very well. Ping sound is like burned into my mind because both bars made that noise when they broke.
Oh man!
And we were super psyched to be able to fight a legend. We didn't advance to the bounty match, but we got to fight a legend in Donald Hudson, and we were pretty happy with the match, even though we didn't win, just because we got to show off our, how we could stay in that fight for 3 minutes and self-right. In addition to the bar being broken, one of those earlier hits had knocked around our internals. We think either maybe the chassis flexed or something, or the internals were just bouncing around too much on their rubber mounts. Because when we opened up the robot, the capacitors on top of the weapon speed controllers were all crushed. So those were running at who knows what proportion of power, because in the test box it made self-righting look easy from a stop, but from this it was just barely able to get back over. So we were super happy we could demonstrate that in a match and see that even somewhat impaired we were able to still do that.
It was, normally when I watch LockJaw fight, I don't really consider the weapon that much of a factor because he's got a decent vertical splitter on it, but I've never really seen it, properly chew up an opponent and give it a good thrashing, really. I've never really seen that until this point, to the top of my knowledge anyway. I don't know if Jevon or Steve, you can remember one that's sticking out to you.
No, it's tended to throw things over, has been its main point. The one that's sticking in my mind is when it's fought Bombshell in 2018.
Yeah,
and it
both times.
Turns it over. Yeah, turns it over, and that's enough to do it.
Yeah. Right. But in this fight, Bloodsport was going very high in the sky. It was getting
triple.
There's a hit about halfway through the fight. That was beautiful.
The judges at this point should have held up cards to say how many points they were.
It's all tens.
Yeah, right. Should have been. And kudos.
And he stuck the landing as well.
Yeah, kudos to keep spinning as well. It is a bit of a brick in a washing machine effect with the robot, but once it's unbalanced, but to keep spinning and to
try
keep going, all the way to the 3 minutes. It lasted 3 minutes, and that's saying something against LockJaw, who throughout this bounty has managed to chew everything up. And
it was
judges almost got the night off, almost.
Yeah. But not quite.
Not quite.
Yeah, we noticed after the bar broke that some of those tires on LockJaw were looking a little like they were hanging on for dear life. So we were trying to maybe peel some of them off, but it didn't happen. But it was still a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, this is far and away much better than the first robot you guys brought. I guess you guys have been told that or know that. It really was nice to see Bloodsport really come into its own this season.
It's gone from being like a very good machine in the first place to now in that kind of bracket of maybe winning the whole competition. And I think that's the biggest testament really you can say, because you've gone from being a team which, again, you don't want to fight it because it's clearly going to cause you damage, to this could genuinely win the whole competition. And, wouldn't surprise me that it must be quite, I don't know if flattering is the right word. How do you feel about it?
Or does it just make you want to work harder to actually finally get that next step?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we're pretty happy with how the robot was functioning this year, but there's a bunch of little things that now we're like, okay, now we got to hone in on this and that and this. It'd be nice if the weapons would stop exploding, and we got to figure out our spin up issues, and then just make sure that we're mechanically sound and that everything can be configured how we want it for each fight.
Absolutely. But there is still one more fight to talk about in this episode. LockJaw gets to be the bounty hunter and fight against Beta. I'm so frustrated.
You should be the most frustrated out of all of us.
So, for those that don't know, for all two of you out there, I am the biggest Team Hertz fan. My favorite robot ever in combat robot history is Terahertz, and by extension, Beta is a wonderful, wonderful, robot as well. I love watching it fight. I loved watching it in season 2. It was so incredible to watch. There were some great moments. It fought when it smashed the hell out of Lucky. It took Tombstone to 3 minutes and was giving it a great scrap. This season I've been so disappointed. That's the biggest thing for me. I don't mind if Beta had turned up and fought some top end opponents and had then lost, because they've been away from BattleBots for 3 seasons. Mm-hmm. They've obviously been in China. They've had their successes over there. They didn't quite win, but they had a decent run of things. They came back with an all new Beta. It's not as if they've Ghost Raptor, like we've spoken about before. They went away and they weren't building robots. The Team Hertz carried on. They kept building. Yeah. Beta this season has so much potential, and we've seen that when it's fully working, the magnets sucking it into the ground like it did against Grabot and smashing through the roof of it, and it was just so beautiful to watch. Yeah. It just seems like whenever it comes up against an opponent which is on its level or around its level, it just can't handle it. And this is the Rotator fight. Okay, yes, you can say one way or the other. I still think that Rotator probably should have won that. Mm-hmm. Given the criteria that we've been given for the last few years and how other decisions have gone in the past. Mm-hmm. Ribot bodied it, and LockJaw bodied it, and I'm so... It's harsh to say because I love the team. I think they're great value, and they've obviously had a great career in the sport, but it's so disappointing, and I think that's what hurts the most.
Yeah, it hurts.
Because I want them to do well. I want them to turn up and be the guys, and I even said there was a post I saw earlier today online, and I said I would now much rather watch Shatter because it's just more interesting to watch now, which is a shame.
I completely agree.
Sorry, it's a big rant. I don't normally do these ranting things, but it hurts,
it's
man.
that you get it out of your system. I mean,
thank you.
The biggest.
And another thing.
I think that you are right that this has been a disappointing season for Beta, and I think the team would agree. What I will say is that in this fight, having watched it back now, it's a marked improvement over their performance against Ribot.
100%. Yeah.
Their weird USS Beta boat-like attachment actually managed to hold LockJaw off for the first minute of the fight, and John drove it like an absolute beast and managed to not get hit by that weapon to an extent where they would get thrown. When LockJaw finally did get a hit, it wasn't a big pop 'em up, it was a hit, get them up, and then drive under into the underside of it, and they removed a magnet at that point. But there was a point where Beta, in the middle of the arena for the first time this season, swung the hammer over and tried to hit LockJaw, and I have to commend them for the attempt. Unfortunately, the design just doesn't work like that because the other robot is still moving, so LockJaw just drove away. And I think you can't design... Yes, you're designing a robot to hit with as much power as you can, but when you look at the two versions of Beta side by side, at least the 2016 version was able to hit things on the move.
This one still can, but obviously not to the same power as when it stopped, and I think that's...
We saw it against Rusty. It can fire on the move. It can fire while not completely locked to the ground.
In which case, I think they need to be doing it more.
So for me, I think I understand the concept of why they're trying to do it, because they want to deliver the maximum impact at any one time, and that makes sense. And they want to cause as much internal damage as they possibly can, and that, again, I understand that.
And when it works, it looks unnatural.
It looks wrong. I don't like it, and it makes you feel all gooey inside. And anyway, the problem then arises is how often as I said, we've spoken about it, in 2020, 2021, how often do you manage to get your opponent completely stopped at any one time with just a wedge? And the answer is not very. Most teams can find a way to drive off. And
you probably have to go back to the early 2000s.
Exactly, and that's
Really?
what I mean. Unless you can find some way of like, if they had like kind of a barbed plow, sort of like a saw blaze, if you like, a big dustpan plow. I feel like that might be quite useful for them because it could hold them in place, and then they could stop, and then they could fire the hammer.
Like Scorpius, like barb.
Yeah,
something to hold
that kind of
them
thing. And
from running away.
I mean, I've ranted it. I want to hear Nick on this one because obviously
we have a think tank going.
Yeah, Nick. Obviously, you obviously a robot with Bloodsport's weapon wouldn't fight the USS Beta anti-vert walls.
Right. I think
how would you see Beta this year?
I think Beta had their horizontal configuration, kind of dialed in. Obviously, it was a close match against Rotator, but I think anytime you depend on pinning your opponent to the wall to use your weapon, you need to go with something like Sawblaze or Scorpius, where you can kind of corral them in that direction. So I think their vertical setups could probably go in that direction a bit, and I think that would help them in a couple other ways. Because when you're braced underneath your opponent with a dustpan like that, you almost don't even need the magnets because all the downforce going into your opponent is now also going into that dustpan and holding you to the ground. So I think that they need some kind of control apparatus for corralling vertical spinners and keeping them off their main chassis.
Yeah, it's...
Sam, I think it's the most disappointing. I think the most disappointing part of this is that this season we had so few foreign teams, and we were hopping on the bandwagon of, wow, we're going to have Beta there, and we're going to have this
mighty hammer.
Yeah, this mighty hammer.
Yeah,
and I think the hype hurt it a little bit.
Like, I think the thing is as well, they have been away for a long time. As much as experiencing fights out in China is one thing, like it, and the scene in China is amazing. It's not of the same level quite yet as BattleBots is, and fighting that caliber of opponent is going to be different. And they can fight all they want with Tanchi and win all they want with Tanchi, but if they're going to turn up to BattleBots, maybe underestimating teams. I'm sure they haven't done. I'm sure they obviously Gabe was there last year with Duck, but but at the same time, it's frustrating because I know they can do better, and I think they know they can do better. And I'm sure they're just as disappointed as how the season went with. I mean, if you'd have said at the start of the year, okay, Beta's only wins are going to be against a controversial win against Rotator, and then wins against Grabbot and Rusty, and then the other two fights they're going to lose, I think you'd kind of feel a bit shortchanged, and I think that's more what it is. I feel like there's definitely more potential in Beta. As we know, we've seen it do so well before, and I think I'd love for them to come back and prove me wrong tenfold next year. I would love that to happen, but like it was just so. I expected so much and I received so little. I think that's probably what's hurt me the most. I've been emotionally damaged by Beta.
I am worried that they may not come back. That this might be the last time we see Beta or something because
because of all this
really
talk.
Because people like us sitting in our armchairs on the internet and saying, "Hey,"
it's not just us; it's Facebook groups, it's social media. There's a lot of spread. I hope John comes back. John, we'd love to speak with you. Please,
I would love to speak with you.
I mean, we've spoken to one of my heroes of the sport this season of BattleBots. Next season, we need to speak to John Reed for Sam's sake.
I hope so.
Steve, who do you want on?
Donald Hudson. I would love to speak to Don.
Maybe
he's great to talk to.
Yeah. Well, he's one of my favorites of the classic era, one of my favorites of the moderns. My favorite classic BattleBots robot is Dissector. It's just such a fun robot to watch, and I'm really happy that he got this win.
I was going to say we've talked an awful lot about Beta, and I think it's only fair that we can gush a little bit about LockJaw now because. Again, to a lesser degree, I'm very frustrated with LockJaw because where was this?
Yeah, it clearly isn't done. We remember, like, this is another one of those robots like, oh, it's had its day. It needs to.
Absolutely not. I feel so. If this LockJaw was fighting in the competition, I mean, with respect to Shatter, I love it, and I think it's the most wonderful thing since sliced bread. But I think a fully functioning LockJaw would have probably been okay, and then it would have fought Mammoth, and I think it probably would have beaten Mammoth. Who would have thought
All
that?
the ifs and buts were candy and nuts. We'd all have a Merry Christmas.
That would have been Endgame.
Then it would have been
Yeah.
Endgame. That's a tough one, that is.
Well,
They
that's a
fought
rematch.
before. Yeah, they fought before.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think in that one, I think one of the big takeaways from this season is that the ground game and especially big,
Yes.
long forks are are pretty important. And
What a
LockJaw, I
difference
think,
a
is
flat
used to
four
having
makes.
the bigger, longer forks
Yeah.
against its opponents. That definitely helped it. I think against Beta, it helped it in its match against us.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see whether Endgame would whip out their bigger, longer forks for that matchup and try to just win the fork reach battle.
You know what's bad is now I'm starting to see like the whole like, oh, they just have forks that just reach across the arena before you even get out of your box.
That's, I mean, the direction it goes.
It's not good.
There's conversations now about possibly, seeing what direction they can take to try to limit that. So there's nothing official on that yet, but
Mhm.
there are talkings among some of the teams. Be like, all right, if they did something, what would they do? It's an interesting problem because you don't want it to just devolve into whose forks are longer.
Yeah. Which I think there was a few complaints about that. I'm not too many because, of course, if it's an advantage, you're going to obviously do it. Especially at that stage of the competition where 3 fights and you've won, you can't
Right.
really say, "Oh, I'm not going to just take every advantage I can get." You're going to do it. So
And Greg has. There's a reason that the floor is not laid even because it does hinder the fork game, and it's a reason that there's kill saw slots.
it's like coleslaw.
Coleslaw slots.
Coleslaw slots.
Welcome to the South. We got our good coleslaw.
And you've got the
Nope.
little spikes coming out the ground as well, which we saw a bit of in this episode. They're all there to try and hinder
break up the fight.
ground game.
Yeah.
And it is interesting. And Greg, I know, wasn't a fan of especially the little spiky things coming out the
The
ground. But
whack-a-moles.
his opinion of them has changed since seeing the sort of longer wedge game becoming more of a factor.
Yeah.
And to circle back to Beta, I know I saw John Reed at one point saying online he doesn't want to get into that fork game, which is I think why he's trying to find
respect that.
alternate setups to fight vertical spinners.
Yeah.
But I think that it's something where if you're going to go to a different style, there are, I think, other changes that could accompany playing that way.
I respect I'm not going to do this because I want to do it my own way because I get it, because if you're going to win, you've got to try and do something different to other teams, right? I respect that because especially with the weapon type that he has, a hammer isn't necessarily the most competitive in, BattleBots today.
I'm not sure a wedgelet Beta would be something that I want to see. I don't think it would look at all happy.
But it may work. I also think
This whole reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
There may come a point where they have to say, well, actually, there is no way around this. We're just going to have to, swallow a bit of pride and do this. I don't know.
And I'm envisioning like Beta with the armor belt and forks of Tantrum.
Yes, it could work.
Yeah. Might have to grow on us like the hermit crab kind of sort of has.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The kind of the rear panel of Beta.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums up the Beta bounty, really. I don't really know what else to say other than, fair play to LockJaw. They absolutely bossed it. And I
front to back, all their fights, it was
incredible. And I do feel, Nick, slightly bad for you guys because as much as Bloodsport was very impressive throughout, you did kind of get matched up against a team in red hot form, and there wasn't much you could do, unfortunately.
Oh, we had a blast.
I bet any more fights you can get while you're out there, I'm sure is icing on the cake. So
right, and if you got to go out, go out with a bang. So we were super happy with that LockJaw match.
Yeah.
It definitely would hurt, and it does hurt to go home with a robot still in functioning form. You know what I mean? Like perfect. Like you feel like you haven't gotten the fights in. You feel like you haven't gotten the R&D. You want to go home with some stuff broken, so at least you can say you were there.
Yes, yeah. So we used the same chassis all the way up from the beginning of the event through the Hijinx fight. And then we had an off day in between Hijinx and LockJaw. So we were like, all right, we'll whip out this spare chassis. So now we have 2 broken chassis, but it's
Hey, happens.
they can be salvaged, and there's nice character added by all the battle damage. So
Yeah.
Well, obviously, at the moment, we're still kind of in the process of applications for a new season. What can you tell us about what's coming for Bloodsport? Because obviously this year has been
Aside from the weapons, we've talked about the weapons ad nauseum.
Of course, but what can you tell us? In terms of you had such a great season this year. But what is going to take you from being a top 16 BattleBot to a potential championship winning BattleBot?
I think
that you can
there's
tell
a
us,
few
obviously.
things. Yeah. So we're definitely working on weapon reliability. We're trying to implement some kind of clutch system in the weapon motors so that those can be happier, because we broke a few of those. And I think just overall reliability. We were having conversations on the team. Are like, all right, do we try to reinvent, go brushless drive and everything? But we're being pretty conservative in terms of big reinventions of the robot like that. And we want to spend our time and energy focusing on the little reliability things that will help us just be more consistent in a match. I think that's what you really need to have going into trying to win the tournament, is just being consistent, being able to be at your peak form deep into the tournament. I think that would go a long way. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think all three of us have been pleasantly surprised by how good Bloodsport's been. It's been great to watch. I think they've had some tremendous fights, as we've said, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. Absolutely for next season. Hopefully with
wedgelets to stay on.
Oh, those wedgelets, man, they were something.
Decorative.
They were meant to be somewhat sacrificial, but not that sacrificial.
Yeah.
A little too sacrificial.
Yeah, the mounts, that's something that needs to be reinvented, because we started off with plastic ones, and then when we were getting closer to the event, we decided to go with welded aluminum. And we were seeing pretty much every possible failure. The welds failed. The hinge pin would fail sometimes. There was one fight where the wedgelet itself broke apart. So that's an area for some re-engineering, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what it's all about, I suppose. And, you've obviously got some useful information for next season. Right then, with that said, I've been Sam Elliott 64.
I've been Steve the American Killjoy.
I have been Woodrow.
I've been Nick from Team Bloodsport.
And the three of us will see you next week for the Witch Doctor bounty, which is very exciting. We'll see you then.